This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanna.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, the United States government and military have entered the war with Iran. Israel and the United States have levied a profound campaign of bombing 3 nuclear sites in Iran in the last 24 hours, Jamal. The United States has joined the war. Despite Donald Trump's warnings that he would not get involved in yet another war in the Middle East, war is part of the U.S. plan right now. 3 nuclear sites in Fodor, Natanz, and Esfahan have been bombed. The Iranian government has said that all of those sites were evacuated and the nuclear material as well as the personnel were removed, yet the United States has said that they have obliterated the Iranian program. We're going to be covering that story, Jamal. It's breaking news, along with some brief updates on what's happening in Palestine. But before we do that, we're going to watch an interview that you did with Dr. Eskandar Sadeghi-Boroujerdi, who is a senior lecturer in the modern history of the Middle East at the University of York. He's going to talk about Israel's attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities and Iran's massive retaliation. He explains why the United States should not make another catastrophic military intervention like the one it did in Iraq. It's a very compelling analysis, Jamal, especially now that the United States has invaded Iran.
Well, yeah, and obviously the interview happened just before President Trump ordered the attack on the nuclear Iranian facilities, and he was warning, let's not do it, as everybody else, I guess. A lot of people who have been saying, let's not repeat the mistake of Iraq. But first, let's watch Dr. Sadeghi. Joining us to discuss the rapidly unfolding events in this theater of escalating combat is Dr. Eskandar Sadeghi-Boroujerdi. He is a senior lecturer in the modern history of the Middle East at the University of York, as well as the author of several books, among which is Revolution and Its Discontents, Political Thought and Reform in Iran, which examines Iran's post-revolutionary reform movement. Welcome to Arab Talk, Eskandar.
Thank you so much for having me. Really great to join you.
So Iran was in the midst of negotiations with the United States when Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to launch a surprise attack on it, targeting the negotiators and top Iranian scientists. Were these negotiations a setup that put Iran off its guard? Some analysts say this attack was in the making for over a year.
Well, we know that the Israeli planning definitely was in the pipeline for at least 8 months, but obviously we also know that there is this long-standing ambition on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu, but I'm sure also more broadly the security and intelligence apparatus within Israel in order to prepare for such a conflict. And I think this is really, I guess, the apogee of his career as he sees it, of course, right? And I think there's just no doubt that the Israelis would carry this out without, obviously, the green light from the United States. And most likely, I mean, we don't know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it would be very surprising, if anything, if there wasn't extensive. We know there's extensive intelligence collaboration between, the NSA and the CIA and the Israeli intelligence services. So my sense is, yeah, absolutely, there was a green light. Perhaps Donald Trump was led to believe that this would be very easy, that this would be a cakewalk, that this sort of decapitation strategy that was pursued would cause the Iranian state just to collapse and then beg and sort of implore for, and would just capitulate, basically. I mean, total surrender, as he put it. And that obviously has not been the case. Obviously, the Iranian, both the sort of leadership and the country has basically borne a heavy cost, but it's actually shown its resilience. It's continuing to fire, obviously, missiles at Israel and with a fair degree of precision, and it's hitting, high-value targets. So, I think that Donald Trump has sold this as this would be easy. It hasn't turned out to be so, and it does seem that actually despite a lot of the bluster and a lot of kind of, I would say, the psychological warfare, but the Americans are putting out feelers, just as are the Iranians, basically. But the Iranians understand that they can't simply pursue diplomacy on terms which are defined by Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that's just a non-starter.
What about Netanyahu? I mean, although Iran was initially, as you've mentioned, taken by surprise, and Israel has air superiority when it comes to fighter jets and other air power, with the help of the United States, of course, that allow it to make sorties into Iran and return. Iran has proven it has strong retaliatory power using hypersonic missiles that have caused multi-billion-dollar damage to Israel's economy, the military, sites, ports, and energy depots. The extent of the damage is censored, as we know now, by Israel. They've been censoring news from there. Did Netanyahu bite off more than he can chew, or was he expecting that the United States would run to the rescue so quickly, along with other countries such as the UK?
Well, I think it's exactly as you sort of said it. I think he not mistakenly believed that that he can't. I mean, he knows the Israelis cannot basically fulfill their ultimate objectives by themselves. They cannot even destroy Iran's nuclear facilities by themselves. And they have done significant damage, but as we know, particularly the Fordow enrichment facility is buried, but basically within a mountain under at least a huge amount of actually of rock, and actually the United States basically designed what they call a massive ordnance projectile penetrator, or a massive ordnance penetrator, specifically. I mean, it was designed specifically in order to target the Fordow installation. And actually, there's even doubts now whether the Americans can actually destroy it. And now there's been some discussion. And again, I think we need to be careful here. But there's been some discussion of the use of potentially of a tactical nuclear weapon. But I think this probably is part of the scaremongering, actually. But yeah, so Netanyahu cannot carry this out by himself. I assume he knew that, and this is why we've seen both Netanyahu, his surrogates, the Jerusalem Post, basically the surrogates of the Israel lobby within the United States, various pro-Israeli senators and congressmen, very, very forcefully saying that Donald Trump needs to basically join the war. And we've really seen this, I would say, hackneyed, really kind of warmed up repertoire, which we saw in the run-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, presenting Iran as some imminent threat. We even sort of heard the Israeli ambassador at the UN now making these ridiculous claims that Iran's missiles can reach Europe. And this absurd level of scaremongering when we're talking about a country which actually hasn't attacked another country in 200 years. It's but they're really trying to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this to try and to push the dial in their favor. I think because they can't ultimately. And I also don't even think the Israelis can carry this on for more than a month. I mean, as you said, there's significant damage being inflicted on Israel despite the media blackout. I've spoken to a Palestinian friend of mine who's a 48er who basically went to visit his family and has been caught up in this. And he was telling me that basically economic life has come to a complete standstill. Schools are closed, universities are closed, businesses are closed. So we shouldn't believe a lot of their claims that they're willing to go on to the end. I think this is part of kind of the psychological campaign, and it's basically which public will be demoralized first. And they've really been trying to do their utmost to demoralize the Iranian public, which also has completely failed as well.
Well, everyone knows that Netanyahu has been peddling the idea of Iran being weeks, days, or months away from developing a nuclear bomb for more than 30 years. If Iran had wanted to have the nuclear bomb, wouldn't it have developed it by now? Is there an ideological reason that Iran has not developed one? And if it had, wouldn't it be a deterrent against such attacks?
Well, I mean, Iran was in the middle of negotiations to basically protect its civilian nuclear program. I think it's just maybe important for the listeners to know that obviously Iran is a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's basically the most inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency. has done more inspections of Iran than any other country. I mean, there's a statistic of that sort of 50% of all inspections basically have been in Iran in recent decades. So, you know, it's monitored closely, you know, and unfortunately, it's also been sort of weaponized against Iran, actually, in this latest kind of report that was issued by the Board of Governors. But I'll leave that to one side for the moment. But I mean, Iran had you know, there was a working, functional diplomatic accord with the JCPOA, which was with the P5+1, sort of the permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. It was working. There was never any doubt that, you know, Iran was actually complying with that. Because the Iranian leadership didn't want to, you know, pay this extremely heavy cost in terms of economic isolation, sanctions, and so on. So they really did want to. They pursued a nuclear accord, and I mean, and Iranians have twice elected a kind of a moderate reformist-leaning president who would be kind of empowered to do that. And obviously, this was in 2013. This was Hassan Rouhani, and more recently, it was Masoud Pezeshkian, who basically was elected on a platform, like really explicitly, to pursue diplomatic negotiations with the United States to get sanctions relief. And yeah, I mean, you also mentioned the religious justification, which, you know, famously Ayatollah Khamenei has issued a fatwa which has prohibited the use of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, actually. And I mean, and this does come out of a history. This comes out of the history of the Iran-Iraq War, where many Iranians, you know, were hit with chemical warfare, chemical weapons. And the legacy of that is very, very an unsavory one. And actually, you know, thousands of Iranian veterans were affected, are still affected, and are dying as a result of that legacy. So that's also a reason. I mean, we should obviously be mindful that, yeah, in recent months, as threats against Iran were really gearing up, there was a lot of indications by the Iranian leadership that, you know, in the event of an existential threat, then they might make that decision. But as we know, the latest even report issued by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said, and this is in line with, you know, 20 years of US intelligence reports and national intelligence estimates, that Iran has not made the decision to pursue weaponization. And as far as we know, no decision has been made. And it's interesting to see Trump, who obviously was elected on this as you know, as some kind of anti-war, anti-interventionist kind of candidate, and was sort of elected to end these sort of endless wars in the Middle East. Actually, and I think some people thought that Tulsi Gabbard would actually sort of represent that sort of agenda, as it were. Yeah, he completely dismissed her. He completely dismissed her. He completely dismissed the intelligence, and it seems that he's pursuing a different track. I think his thinking is. And I think it's very much misplaced, but he believes that he can actually also just use Netanyahu and the Israeli war and use basically the Israelis as a proxy in order to pressure Iran, in order to kind of beat down Iran and pummel Iran and force it to capitulate. And I think it hasn't worked. And I think he's going to be in for a surprise, actually, what's coming down the line.
I should mention that, of course, we should remind our viewers and listeners that Israel is the only country to have introduced nuclear weapons to the Middle East, and it does not allow inspectors to inspect its nuclear facilities. Also, I just want to say, just recently, it looks like Tulsi Gabbard has been walking back her statement. And of course, it comes after Trump dismissed what he said, what she said. So, despite Israel being the aggressor, European countries such as France, the UK, and Germany, so the so-called E3, keep repeating the mantra, Israel has the right to defend itself. There is a growing bipartisan resistance in the United States against the country once again being dragged into a disastrous war based on lies and identical propaganda that was used to defend its war on Iraq. Do you think the core issue here is that Iran is a country that took back its sovereignty by overthrowing the Shah, who was allied with the West, with the United States and Israel?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the immediate threat for the Israelis were, exactly as you said, they are undeclared nuclear arsenal, which was supported by both, you know, apartheid South Africa and the French and other Western powers. And they were threatened by the very possibility that Iran had mastered the fuel cycle. As I said, I mean, Iran, the nuclear fuel cycle, and was able to enrich uranium on its soil. They were threatened by that very fact because, I mean, Iran did not, like, had previously agreed to never enrich more than 3.6%, which can only ever be used for civilian and research and medical purposes. It cannot be weapon. It cannot serve a weapon, a program in any way. And Iran had agreed to that. But I think just the very fact of Iran being a nuclear threshold state, this very possibility was too much that they could be willing to tolerate. And that's, I think that's one of the main things driving the attack. And of course, there is this broader, this long-standing enmity on the part of the United States and the Israelis as it developed with respect to a powerful country in the region. I don't think they would stomach any powerful region which is actually able to guarantee its own self-determination. I mean, they're really ultimately interested, I think, in they're not interested in state building either, as we saw following Iraq. I mean, they're not capable of doing it, the United States, and neither are they particularly interested in it. And I think Trump, this is like tenfold the case. They're much more interested, I think, in just breaking the back and basically fragmenting these states. And we've seen kind of the legacy of that, because obviously the Israelis, as we speak, are using Syrian airspace. Obviously, the Jordanian state is cooperating, very much working hand in glove there. And they're using Syrian airspace and Iraqi airspace in order to refuel over these countries to then obviously make their way to Iran, because it's obviously quite a distance. So no, I do think that is a broader agenda. And I definitely think, Netanyahu's vision of the so-called quote unquote new Middle East is one in which there's just absolutely unparalleled Israeli hegemony, or Israel basically working on behalf of the United States. And obviously, the Israel lobby, the likes of Netanyahu, and many in the United States see the US and Israeli sort of interests as indistinguishable. And I think, obviously there's the long-standing left criticisms of this. There's the criticisms of people like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, Noam Chomsky and others. But also, we've seen on the right as well, increasing kind of a more vociferous sort of pushback against this idea.
Many political leaders in the United States are declaring that the end goal is not dismantling Iran's nuclear program, but regime change, repeating what Netanyahu and his ministers have publicly stated recently. There are many Iranians critical of their government, both living in diaspora as well as in Iran. However, from what I have been reading and seeing, people are united behind the government whose sovereignty they see as under attack. Will this solidarity last, or will Israeli and American propaganda sow division amongst Iranians?
I mean, I think they're going to do their utmost to do that. They have been trying to do that. They've been doing that for many years. I mean, they sponsor and pay for all sorts of diaspora Farsi language news channels, satellites which beam into Iran, which are really a kind of, I guess, a soft power, soft war kind of campaign, and propaganda campaign for the most part. Obviously, as you said, there are many Iranians who do not like the Islamic Republic, who take issue with it, who would like to see a different system in place. It also has a deep base of support as well amongst a certain constituency. But Iran, like any society, it's a highly variegated, it's a diverse place, and there's lots of political disagreement, and there's a broad political spectrum of opinion. But as you said, I mean, even if we don't even say they're rallying behind the regime, let's say, even though I've seen many who have been actually, because they see it as the only really potent force that can ensure sort of the states held together and sort of their security. But let's say even we put that to one side, there has been a very, very robust defense of, you could call the homeland, of the Vatan, of the Watan, and this has really emerged with force because, especially in the first days, even as the number of casualties of civilians just mounted and mounted, they understood very clearly that this is not simply an attack on the quote unquote the regime. It is an attack on Iran more broadly. It's an attack on its state institutions. They've attacked civilian infrastructure across the country. They've killed many civilians, as I said. They've attacked the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, sorry. They've, this idea that you can have this surgical, neat kind of sort of attack, and there's only going to attack, regime officialdom and so on, is for the birds. And I think Iranians fully understand that, and they understand it as an attack on the country as a whole. Which actually, I mean, before this, there was a significant amount of sort of disgruntlement and grievances with the political system. And actually, obviously, when in a time of war, as you would expect, those get suppressed. Because obviously the priority is the foreign enemy, and that's what we're seeing.
The late Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, is floated as a legitimate replacement leader for Iran. He's been living in exile since 1980. Is he as popular in Iran as what some Western media would lead you to believe? Or would he be foisted upon the Iranian people in a repeat of the 1953 CIA-orchestrated coup, which overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstated his father? This is of course, purely hypothetical.
I think this is their fantasy. I think they live in a fantasy world. I mean, the Iran of today is not the Iran of 1953. I mean, the Islamic Republic was forged in an 8-year war with Iraq, whereby it actually really consolidated a very, very kind of powerful military, like, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, the military, and so on and so forth. And they are very much committed to defending the regime. They're committed to defending the country as it exists. So it's just simply not remotely comparable. And the IRGC alone is a force of about 190,000 people. So I think they're living in a fantasy there. If anything, it might you'll see a change of kind of the guard, as it were, and it's very likely that you'll see more aggressive officers emerging potentially. And it could, ultimately it could transform the regime, but not in the way that they think. It could turn it into a kind of Praetorian military sort of regime, as opposed to one which has this sort of theocratic elements. But yeah, Reza Pahlavi, I think he's just, he does, of course, have some support, but I think they're quite marginal, and I don't think they're really cohered into anything of substance. And he's kind of seen as a ridiculous figure. There's sort of video of him doing yoga headstands. He's unable to pour water for himself. He even did a podcast called the PBD podcast in the United States, where he kind of said that, if there was a revolution in Iran, that he wouldn't actually go back full time to the country because his friends and social circles are in the United States. So he's just a very kind of lightweight, ridiculous figure. He went to Israel, I think, in 2022. He basically pledged fealty to Netanyahu. And yeah, he's absolutely just been mimicking and parroting the Israeli line. And I think a lot of Iranians actually, even those who might have been somewhat sympathetic to him, I've even seen one-time monarchists really laying into him as an absolute traitor because and saying that his father would execute, or his grandfather would execute him under these conditions for treason. So I've seen there's a wide array of reactions, but I've seen he was so just wholeheartedly and uncritically endorsing this and basically saying that Iranians welcome any attack on Iran because it weakens the regime. And it's just, I think it's really fallen flat. And if anything, actually, it's put him on a par of the likes of the People's Mujahideen of Iran, who obviously famously sided with Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, which, before the revolution were quite popular in certain quarters. But then, and they weren't sort of the cult that they ultimately became. But after that, they just have never been able to recover. They are just seen as a tool of Israeli or other kind of foreign powers kind of agendas for Iran, basically.
So the Iranian negotiators are now talking to European representatives, expressing their willingness to resolve this through diplomatic channels before it escalates out of control. They insist that there must be a complete stop to Israel's aggression first. Nevertheless, the United States has squandered any credibility and trust after supporting Israel's attack. I saw a statement by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and he said, and I'm quoting here, "We have reached the conclusion that American diplomacy was nothing more than a cover for Israel's evil scheme. If the United States wants to resume diplomacy, it must first order Israel to cease its attacks." What would you like to see?
I would like to see, ideally, I'm not sure it will happen, but I would obviously like to see, I don't have any faith in Europe. And actually, I do think Trump's comments regarding Europe were exactly right. Europe is not going to do anything for Iran. And what's very clear, actually, is that the Europeans have basically moved far closer to the Trump administration's position. So I think, one needs to be very, very careful. But, the German chancellor only just a couple of days ago said that Israel was literally doing quote unquote our dirty work. So I don't think there's much trust there at all. I mean, ideally, obviously, the situation would be for the Trump administration to once again come back to stop this assault, to pursue negotiations. They were, Iran was in negotiations with the United States. They met 5 times with Steve Witkoff. They were meant to meet 2 days, after Israel launched its attack on June 13th. So, I mean, I think this is the best way forward. I mean, I think it's the only way forward. Because, I mean, as we know, you can't actually change a regime through like an aerial campaign in this way. This is just not going to work at all. Iran is not going to bow and capitulate in this way because they understand if they capitulate now, it will never end. It will never end. And also, it's a question of legitimacy at home. I mean, I think that is also an issue. And I mean, Iran has contingency plans for the U.S. involvement. They completely are capable of, raising the cost for the Trump administration to very, very high levels. And this could include, potentially, I think it's an extreme sort of measure of last resort, but closing the Strait of Hormuz and all these other things, and striking at U.S. military bases across the Gulf. And obviously, they are, it has several bases in the Gulf region, which Iran can easily hit. I mean, it's much closer than Israel. I mean, it's not a problem. And I don't think Iran wants to do that, actually. Iran has really insisted that this is not the course that it wants to pursue. If anything, it's trying to say that and trying to portray itself as the reasonable actor in the region, as not the agent of instability, and not the sort of initiator of this aggression. I mean, that's what they've really been portraying. They said, we're not going to do that unless we really are forced to, unless basically we see sorties from American bases across the Gulf. I really think they will be resisting it because obviously they want to try and keep the Gulf states in a difficult position, whereby on the one hand, of course, they are very close to the United States, but they also do understand this will have a very heavy cost for them if the United States enters into the breach and basically launches a war on Iran, for which obviously, Trump hasn't put to Congress or anything, I mean, under what sort of legal pretext he's doing this eludes me. But but ideally, I think they should come back to the negotiating table and not expect capitulation. Capitulation is not a negotiation. Negotiation means that both sides have to make concessions and on terms which they can accept, so it can actually endure. And for the minute, it seems that Trump is very willing to use the Israeli assault to gain leverage. But yeah, I think Iran is a huge country. Its people have been through conflicts before like this. I mean, Iran isn't the society of the 1980s by any means, but still, in situations of war, I really have seen people have, they've understood the gravity of it, of course, because they're feeling it in their sort of everyday material lives. And I think my understanding is Iran is prepared, if necessary, for a longer campaign. And I'm not so sure, actually, even though Israeli society is very much behind this, because, of course, they've been propagandized for decades that Iran is this ultimate evil. Whether they are willing to endure this kind of complete shutdown of society for the coming weeks is, we shall see, I guess. We shall see.
Do Russia and China play a part in this equation? For example, Iran's single functioning nuclear power plant, Bushehr facility, was built by Russia, and there are hundreds of Russian personnel working there. China also has significant economic interests in Iran.
I mean, from what I've read in the news, just like Russia and Israel apparently have some kind of understanding that they will not strike at Bushehr. I mean, that has been agreed. But I don't think Iran or the world should really expect sort of the cavalry to come from either China or Russia. I mean, I'm not obviously a Russia or China analyst, but my understanding of people that I think it seems very plausible to me, their analysis says that China is actually quite happy for the United States to get bogged down in another quagmire in the Middle East and spend, trillions of dollars again and expend resources of blood and treasure while they continue to build up, their own kind of economic base and power and military power, and in their own sphere of influence in East Asia, of course. So I don't think, obviously, they will be giving diplomatic support. They have been strong there for sure. They will be sort of trying to pursue some diplomatic track, because obviously for China as well, instability of this nature does have a knock-on effect for them, because obviously they get a lot of their hydrocarbons, not just from Iran, but from the Persian Gulf region. So that will have negative impacts. It will have globally negative impacts. I mean, already, just the other day, it was announced that insurance for shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has doubled, which is going to have significant consequences for, energy bills, food bills, because obviously it relates to so much in terms of, the use of energy, transport, and so on. So it's gonna have these knock-on effects, and I think Trump maybe does understand that, but at the minute he's really willing to play this kind of game of brinksmanship, and he likes this sort of sense that he's very unpredictable and sort of the madman theory and all these sorts of things. But I don't think it's going to work. And if anything, I even saw sort of Iranian analysts sort of referring back to the kind of the really fiery rhetoric he was using against North Korea, and obviously, which then he ultimately backed down from. And obviously, there is a significant difference here. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, unlike North Korea. But again, I think he's kind of overplayed his hand potentially. But again, we shouldn't underestimate, just the power of the United States and its military. I mean, that would be obviously foolish.
Well, let's talk about the worst case scenario. Should the United States join the war and possibly drag in the UK, a scenario I had to consider, where will this lead us to in Iran, in the Middle East, and the world at large? Some utter the dreadful possibility of World War III, which I've been reading. Where do you see this leading to, really?
I mean, I don't think it would trigger. I mean, because there aren't just these sorts of treaties, defense treaties, whereby other great powers would be forced to kind of step in. They might, through indirect means, support Iran, or they might do it through neighbors like Pakistan. And Pakistan has actually been quite outspoken in this regard, and of course is a nuclear power. It does have nuclear weapons. But I mean, we could have a really kind of huge, obviously, economic shock. I think that much is very, very clear. We could have, I mean, the United States, even if it does ultimately bomb the Fordo facility, you can't really even dismantle the Iranian program in this way. You're actually, I mean, I think all analysts really understand this only will delay matters. And if anything, actually, it makes the drive, or it makes sort of the logic and the argument for pursuing a nuclear weapon, very, very strong. Because obviously Iran just compares how North Korea was treated versus how Libya was treated, what ultimately happened to Gaddafi and the Libyan state. So, the only way you could potentially completely dismantle the Iranian nuclear is if you pursued an invasion and an occupation, which would basically be fiercely resisted. I mean, the Revolutionary Guard is not not comparable to sort of Hezbollah and other forces. It's like it's a national and military power, and the army is I mean, in total it's almost like 650,000 military force. And of course, the question is like how will it be able to sort of retain its morale and esprit de corps? But it could really drag the United States into an unparalleled kind of quagmire with the likes of which they've never seen. And as I said, I mean, we could see the closure of the Strait of Hormuz potentially if it really is existential. We could see strikes on US bases across the region. We could actually see, I mean, Iran previously, I mean, it never actually officially admitted to it, but basically when Saudi Arabia under obviously Mohammed bin Salman was basically backing American maximum pressure campaign, Iran also launched a drone strike at its installations in Aramco, basically knocked out half of its crude production capacity. So it's not even just the Strait of Hormuz. It could really have, and that was just that was literally just a shot across the bow. That was not.
They gave a warning also before.
Yeah. That wasn't a decisive kind of all sort of end times kind of scenario. So I think the Gulf states do understand that actually, and that's why we've seen sort of detente with Saudi Arabia and others over in preceding years, brokered by China, who obviously favors stability. But yeah, no, I think it would be very, very bad, very quickly. And to be honest, I don't think. I mean, however reckless Trump is, I don't think he has the appetite for that. I mean, I don't think so. So I don't. I think I'm hoping for the sake of the region. I'm hoping for the sake of my own family in the country, and so on. That we don't get to that point, and we do reach a de-escalation point. And as I said, there is evidence of this. There are feelers being put out. There are letters being exchanged. There is a back and forth. But obviously, there's a question on what terms this ends, I think, and I think that's the crucial thing.
Talk about the human toll of Israel's attack on Iran. Israel has killed more than 600 people, and the number could be much, much higher in Iran since its initial attack. Talk about the impact on ordinary people. We read heartbreaking stories about lives cut short, athletes, poets, children, so many just going about their lives. President Trump wants an entire population of more than 9 million people in Tehran to evacuate the capital. Mainstream media is focused on the damage caused by the Iranian missiles in Tel Aviv and Haifa, but hardly mentions the suffering of the Iranians, if at all.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Tehran is obviously a city of, 10, 11 million people. And people have been very much affected. Many have, who could or decided to sort of left the country, left Tehran and have gone maybe to places in the north of Iran and Mazandaran and elsewhere, which they believed were safer. But I think that was very much part of the psychological war, sort of war campaign, the sort of campaign to demoralize the Iranian population. And actually, there was a campaign on the part of Iranians to say, we will not leave Tehran, we will not leave. So I think people are very much experiencing it differently. As I said, their lives have been upended. They haven't been able to. There was also cyber attacks on major banks within Iran, so people weren't able to take their money out of their accounts, and obviously to buy groceries and all these sorts of things. So these are people's lives have been very much affected. And as you said, I mean, children, women, just ordinary people have been really brutally affected. I mean, my own in-laws. Basically, the Israelis threatened to target sort of an area called Area 3, which is really like I don't know how it's maybe in the US where you are, but I think it's like for instance, if I was going to compare it to London, it would be like sort of targeting Regent's Park, Hyde Park, Marble Arch. And sort of Oxford Street, it's sort of major kind of parks, busy sort of centers, full of sort of apartment buildings, full of cafes, full of restaurants, full of retailers, and things like this. And that was like explicitly targeted. And I mean, very close to actually where my in-laws live. I mean, we sort of the block over, as it were, missiles have struck. I mean, they just constantly were hearing the sound of these sort of anti-missile sort of systems operating, as well as actually missiles. So, and obviously because of that, just unable to sleep, because it's just this constant sort of sound of explosions going all around you. But I think we should say, and we should add, of course, the genocide in Gaza is continuing apace, and we're seeing very high casualty numbers still. And we should, of course, understand Netanyahu's move here, at least in part, to deflect from that. Because I think there was just so much popular pressure in Europe, but also more broadly across the world amongst the general public. And I know that US public opinion has shifted considerably as well on this, that actually he was getting a lot more criticism, and Israel was getting a lot more criticism for this campaign, and obviously the many kind of war crimes that it has committed. And of course, he's got a warrant issued for his arrest by the ICC. So in part, it is a deflection from that. But as I said earlier, I mean, I think seeing the toll on civilians, seeing the way in which the state has been targeted, I mean, television was bombed live on air, as I'm sure you saw, targeting journalists and en masse. So and a number were killed. So I mean, Iranians are resilient. I mean, they've been through 8 years of war before. There was the War of the Cities, in the Iran-Iraq War. But yeah, Iranian society has obviously vastly changed. I don't want to minimize that. But what I've seen is people really rallying together, people sharing and breaking bread, people putting aside their differences for the moment, and focusing on the bigger threat at the minute.
Eskandar Sadeghi, thank you for coming on Arab Talk and sharing all your knowledge with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. So lovely been speaking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
That's the voice and the face of Dr. Eskandar Sadeghi-Boroujerdi. He's a senior lecturer in the modern history of the Middle East at the University of York. Even though the interview, Jamal, happened just before the United States invaded Iran and bombed those 3 nuclear sites, it's a very profound, compelling analysis that he and an entire world community have said it's a grotesque catastrophic mistake for the United States to get involved in the war in Iran. And I think what's interesting about his analysis, you see a lot of people on the Trump MAGA right, including Tucker Carlson and a number of right-wing conservative analysts who have compelled and demanded and said to President Trump, do not do this. Yet he decided to do it anyways. I think we're headed for a very catastrophic long-term consequence, Jamal. And we know that the Iranians have sent in drones into Israel right now. There have been numerous attacks. It looks like this is going to escalate.
Well, it has escalated immediately because, the Iranians retaliated almost immediately, a couple of hours, maybe less, afterwards, hitting Tel Aviv and Haifa. And we'll keep seeing the damage getting bigger and bigger, although Israel now is censoring reporters and people who are taking videos from showing where the hits are. But I know that today they targeted a biological laboratory that they said they've destroyed. This is according to Iranian news. They were also targeted Ben Gurion Airport. I don't have any confirmation whether the missiles hit Ben Gurion, but definitely they've hit residential buildings. We've seen a lot of devastation on the ground because one of these missiles can take an entire block, basically. Just so later on, Israel also sent a sortie. So you can expect Iran has been just responding within 24 hours or less.
Right.
So whenever Israel attacks, the Iranians immediately respond. And so now, after this happened, and President Trump, he said that the 3 nuclear sites in Iran have been obliterated. And he said that that the United States and Israel were in full coordination with the U.S. in planning the strikes. Now, what we know, Iran said they moved everything out. They moved the important stuff out.
Exactly. Right.
And the one thing we know from analysts and experts, the main target was Fordo, a uranium enrichment plant hidden in a remote mountainside. That's like the most vital to Iran's nuclear program. And they said there is hardly any damage there. That's according to the Iranians, because it's hidden away in a mountainside south of Tehran, and it is deeper underground than the channel tunnel connecting the UK and France. This is how deep. So due to Fordo's depth below ground, the U.S. supposedly used, or not supposedly, I should say, they confirmed using the bunker buster bomb big enough to penetrate the site. This is according to the U.S., which is the GBU, and 57 massive ordnance penetrator MOP. It weighs 13,000 kilograms and is able to drop through about 18 meters or 60 feet of concrete.
Well,
the question is if it was able to go all the way down, because they say that it's a huge tunnel.
Yeah, but it hasn't been confirmed, Jamal. Let's be clear about this. The Iranians did indicate that they were able to remove people and personnel and material and a lot of things that have protected their nuclear program. At least this is what the Iranians have said. We don't have any independent confirmation that these sites have, quote, been obliterated. And this, I think, and we spoke about it last week, is a really kind of grotesque miscalculation on the part of the Israelis and the Americans. We're not sure exactly what the long-term strategic consequences are going to be, but based on all the analyses and our read of history, there's no good outcome here. I mean, it looks like this is just going to inflame the situation. The Americans have removed a lot of the weaponry that they have in the Gulf region. The Gulf leaders have been having secret meetings in Qatar to decide what they can do. The United States has the largest military base, one of the largest military bases in the world, and military personnel is in Qatar, outside of Doha. So the situation remains very, very intense, very, very, difficult for everybody in the region. And I really believe that Donald Trump has miscalculated yet again. Now, on the other side, Israel has noted that they killed 19, nuclear scientists and the top commanders in the Iranian military. So this situation is far from being over, and the diplomatic efforts with the EU and Iran have been stalled and are not making any progress. Looks pretty grim right now, Jamal.
Well, according to the Trump administration, they said this is a kind of like a one-off, which I don't know.
Well, why would? But he also said if Iran doesn't come to peace, there's going to be much more. So why would anybody believe Trump? Trump also said it's going to be 2 weeks, and then 2 days later he bombed Iran.
Yeah. Well,
so why would anybody? Why would
Iran has
believe
not retaliated against any as of today? Any American targets, it retaliated against Israel. And to your point, basically now they're calling the Iranians back to the negotiation table, And I was reading a tweet by the foreign minister, Aragashi, and he wrote, which exactly this is what happened. He said, last week we were in negotiations with the U.S., when Israel decided to blow up that diplomacy. This week, we held talks with the E3 in the EU, the E3, UK and France and Germany. When the US decided to blow up that diplomacy, what conclusion would you draw? So, if this happened to you, would you believe that the negotiations are going to work, or it's a trap for you again to let your guard down and then they'll bomb you again? Because that's why the Iranians are very skeptical. And it seems that they still have a lot of firepower because they've been responding, and each time they've been responding with faster missiles and bigger warheads and so on. And Israel has not been able to stop them, despite what they say always, that we got most of them. Yeah, but you got most of them. And if 6 of them hit Tel Aviv and Haifa, that's a lot of damage. And the Iranians have been playing this game, because I've been spending a lot of time watching what's going to happen whenever they detect these missiles towards them. Usually they start with some smaller drones and smaller missiles, get all the Israeli and American defenses, and supposedly there are also British defenses from the sea and so forth, trying to locate these missiles and start shooting them down. Then they come up with the hypersonic ones after they kind of depleted and confused them, and they hit. So every single time now, when Iran launches something, they hit. And they destroy an entire block. And my big fear, aside from everything, who's going to pay for this? You know who's going to pay for this? I shouldn't ask this question. Exactly. Who's going to rebuild, all these apartment buildings in Tel Aviv and Haifa? Who's going to rebuild the port of Haifa and so forth?
You will,
the American
Jamal.
taxpayer is going to be paying for this. And that's why, besides now, and thank God we haven't had any Americans hurt, or there hasn't been attacks on American bases for this conflict to expand. But at the end of the day, I was looking at the stealth bombers that went and bombed and the distances they traveled and returned.
Yeah.
You know how much they spend in fuel alone?
Oh, tens of millions of dollars.
Some estimates said just in fuel and preparation, $100 million. $100 million. And then that's not counting the price for these bunker buster bombs, which cost millions of dollars. So the American taxpayer, again, is footing this to a war that Netanyahu, I don't know what you want to call him, the war criminal Netanyahu, or the smartest person on earth to lure the United States in footing the bill and fighting his war. And that's why you've mentioned all these conservatives and others who have been criticizing this and saying, this is not our war, step aside. We've learned our lesson to what happened to us in Iraq. You yourself, Mr. President, were against it. You used examples criticizing your predecessors for dragging us into the Iraqi quagmire, the Syrian quagmire, the Yemeni quagmire. Why do it now?
Well, why do it now is because Trump wants to get some kudos and some historical claim that he did this. And he didn't want to be left out, I believe, of Netanyahu's kind of criminal, illegal plan to bomb Iran, which he's been wanting to do for decades. We know that. And this was his chance. He knows that he can play Trump, and he's played Trump like a T. He has played him so well. It is a classic example of the tail wagging the dog. This is going to drag the United States politically, globally, economically into a quagmire. Gas prices are going to go up. If the Iranians decide to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, Jamal, gas prices, could double easily. And, it's not that far from Iran to Bahrain and to Qatar, where we have and Kuwait, where we have large presence of American bases and military personnel. I think the situation is very, very dicey right now. And I believe that this is the one thing that can cost Donald Trump his historical place as this great MAGA president. This is really going to cost him, is my idea, because the Iranians are not going to back down. They're just not going to do it. And so diplomacy is not going to go very far, because I think this is actually going to create the conditions for the Iranians to definitely want to get a nuclear program restarted and facilitated much more quickly now because of this, because they can't protect themselves.
Well, President Trump ran on the promise of America first, improving the economy.
Israel first.
Not getting engaged, dragging the United States into wars. And we're seeing things, running the opposite way.
Yeah, but let's not forget, Jamal, while this is going on, I think it's important for us to note this. Every single day, Israel has murdered 50 to 60 to 70, over 100 Palestinian women and children and civilians every day in Gaza trying to get food. The food program is basically stopped completely, the American-Israeli food program. Palestinians are being killed. They're starving to death. All these warnings about the starvation of children in Gaza are being kind of ignored by the world community. So this is serving a lot of different purposes for Benjamin Netanyahu as they continue their genocidal campaign in Gaza.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.